Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And tonight we have Dr. Rick Neff, founder of Inner Edge Sports Psychology. You do not want to miss this episode. Sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and before I introduce my buddy Rick Neff, Dr. Rick Neff, I will do what I always do. I talk about the podcast, where you can find it. You know, it's everywhere. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to podcasts, that's where you can hear Two Dates and a Dash. This is the 67th episode. When I started this, I had no idea what I was doing, and I still really don't. My life is a series of wing-its. So that's kind of the way I approach everything in my life, and I'm winging this as we go. As everybody knows, I don't have a plan when I do my show. I ask one question. Rick will get the same question everybody else gets. But I really love the organic nature of the show. So I'm really excited to talk to Rick Neff today. The podcast is growing. I'm now doing a second podcast. This show is the storytellers. I feature people on the show. It's not really about me. I do give a little bit of back and forth, and if it calls for me to give personal information about me during the show, I do. But for the most part, I'm featuring other people's stories. The new podcast, the second podcast, I'll still be doing this one, is called Third Shift Chronicles. So it's a 15 to 20 minute long solo show where I'm just going to tell stories about my life as a soldier in the Army, where I work night shift. There's a theme here. My 27 years as a cop, where I worked a majority of that night shift, which is third shift in the police world. So I'm going to share stories, funny stories, sad stories, angry stories, you name it. I'm going to share a bunch of different stories. I'm going to talk about current events, politics, sharing opinions. It's my chance to sort of feature what's inside of me in the podcast format. So I'm excited about that. So that's Third Shift Chronicles. That's the first show will be dropping this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. So look for that. If you are a fan of this show, you will love that show. This podcast is sponsored by E4 Strength, my company. As an entrepreneur, I get to do what I want, and I'm sponsoring my own podcast. So e4strength.com is the website. We are the premier eccentric strength training technology manufacturer. Essentially, we create a piece of equipment that attaches to any existing piece of equipment, and that allows us to change how that piece of equipment operates. Imagine if you have a squat rack and a barbell, and you put 405 pounds on that barbell and you lower 405 pounds. Typically, you would have to raise that 405 pounds back up. With our device hooked to it, you can offload weight from that up to 250 pounds. So you could lower 405 pounds and raise 200 pounds if you wanted to. So that's the unique nature of that. The body can hold and lower more weight than it can lift. Muscle is built under tension. So if I put up 405 pounds on a slower descend, it's going to tear more muscle fiber. And the more times I can do that, the better, which is why lifting weight off of your back in a squat is so beneficial. So if you want to learn more about that, go to e4strength.com. All right, all the housekeeping's done. My chance to introduce Dr. Rick Neff. So Rick and I have been friends, I don't know, 8-9 years, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And he's a Pottstown guy. He's just like me, except he decided to go to college after Pottstown, which I did not. So he's a sports psychologist, a regular psychologist too, I guess, but he specializes in athletes, and his work, I've seen it firsthand with athletes, is second to none. Anybody that I know that's an athlete that needs to have figure out how to slow their mind down or gain focus or create peace within their mind when they're about ready to go perform, I always refer them to Nick. So Rick, without further ado, my man Rick Neff.
It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your podcast and be able to kind of share my story, my experience, and my how, my why I'm here. So thank you.
Well, I think it's going to be fun because we're friends, so we can sort of act like two dudes at a bar, which is kind of what I always try to make it out, unless I have a female,
Yeah.
and it's obviously not two dudes. But um, what I'm really excited about is to share your story from growing up in Pottstown to when you transcended from just being a kid from Pottstown to becoming a world renowned and a very popular sports psychologist. But that journey has a lot of moments to it, and it's not just you were and now you are.
Right.
There's
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the routine. You get one question that's planned, and it's the same question everybody gets. So it's a deep one. So depending on where your brain's at the moment, will determine how you answer it.
All
Who
right.
is Rick Neff?
Who is Rick Neff? Oh, great question. So who is Rick Neff? Just like Matt said, a 41-year-old now man from Pottstown, Pennsylvania, with a passion for people, for helping people, whether it's athletes, student athletes, CEOs of companies, whoever it may be, to just become the best version of themselves. And when I say best version of themselves, it's looking at their emotional health and mental health. It's such a stigmatized world, area of society, sitting down and talking to somebody about how we feel, that being able to have a platform like this to get it out there to help break some of that stigma, is something that I'm very passionate about. That's what drives me day in and day out to have my own private practice, be a part of Tower Health, their movement, being the clinical director with Tower Health, Pottstown Hospital. So who is Rick Neff? I'm a big believer in why. So the why and the how. So why am I here? Why am I sitting here today with you? Why am I have had the opportunities to work with professional athletes all around the world? And I always go back to a personal experience for me that got me to be sitting here today. And that was being a college baseball player, having, grown up, played football, basketball, baseball, wrestled a little bit. So I got knocked out unfairly going from varsity wrestle offs, and it kind of put me off a little bit. But, being a high level baseball player, with the opportunity to possibly, get drafted, and, being in college and developing the yips. So if anybody out there is familiar with baseball and developing the yips, not being able to throw a baseball. So something I did for so long, from 4 years old to 19 years old when I developed the yips, it was devastating to me. It was, I'm trying to be the number one pitcher in the rotation. It's 60 feet, 6 inches. That number will always ring true in my head. And I couldn't hit that catcher to save my life. If there's $10 million in that catcher's mitt coming back from holiday break, standing on that mound in the field house, it wasn't going to happen. So I had actually started school as a pre-med major. So kind of dialing back, when I was 12 and 13, playing Little League Baseball, international tournament, trying to get to Williamsport, every Little League player's dream, tore my meniscus in my right knee. And going to the orthopedics office, going to sports med, going to the office, it's crutch signed by Randall Cunningham, basketball by Charles Barkley. And being a 12-year-old kid, I was fascinated. My mother's a nurse, and when I was young, we used to watch the surgery shows. I don't think they can put them on the air anymore, but they're kind of cracking chests open and peeling faces back. I was fascinated by that. So going into the surgeon office, knowing I'm going to need surgery, I had asked to watch my operation. And
You're like one of the rarest kids that would be like, hey, by the way, I want to be awake during this whole thing.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, I want to see what they do to my knee. So they numb my leg, and I got to watch them operate on my knee. And coming out of that operation, I knew at that point, okay, if I can't be a professional athlete, I want to help athletes get back onto the field, get back onto the court, whatever it may be. It was such a profound experience to me. So I can fix up their knee, elbow, ankle, whatever it was, wherever the injury was, and help them get back the way this doctor was helping me get back, because he was such a great doctor, Dr. John Donahue.
He did one of mine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was such a personable guy. He really educated me on everything, and he and I really connected. And so again, coming out of that surgery, I thought, if I can't play pro sports, I'm going to be an orthopedic surgeon. Unfortunately, when I was 13, same thing. So junior legion state baseball tournament, tore my meniscus again. Watched the operation. Um, just reinforced that notion that I want to help athletes get back on the field, court, etc. And then in high school, playing quarterback, I cyst grew on my wrist. I watched them cut that off. I was playing quarterback, that ball would come back. It would hit that cyst and shoot up my arm. Watch them cut one off the top of my hand. So, all these surgical experiences led me to declare a pre-med major going into college. And so this perfect storm happened of sophomore year, developing the yips, can't throw a baseball, having, unfortunately at that time, 1999, people around where it's like, suck it up, get over it. What's your problem? Coach is yelling, screaming, get off the mound. And I didn't know what was happening. So I was taking my pre-med classes, anatomy, physiology, learning about, neurology, at the same time taking psychology electives. My only exposure to psychology in high school was, and I remember it profoundly because it caught my attention, about 5 minutes in social studies class my senior year of high school. It's kind of, psychology is the study of people and the human mind and how people interact. I'm like, oh, well, kind of sparked my interest because I'm thinking, being an athlete, being among teams, why do certain players like to get yelled at versus some players break down, and family dynamics, all that stuff. So I started to take some psychology electives, and essentially, with the yips, got all the physical workup done, everything checked out just fine, and I essentially had to figure it out on my own. That it was something that was going on psychological. So taking all the education I was receiving, Penn State, to be able to, learning about the biology of psychology. So it's something that's going on with me mentally. It's it's a mental block that's preventing my body from performing because throwing a baseball is so routine. So I, kind of worked myself through it. I had learned about the genetic factor. So talking to my mom and dad about, is there a biological component to anxiety? They both have anxiety. Learning about how environmental stressors impact us emotionally. So here I am trying to be the number one pitcher in the rotation. I walk into it, put a lot of pressure on myself, and what it was is my mind let me down, my brain let me down. So after working myself through it, never made the majors, but was able to throw the baseball again. I now play adult league softball. Went on, played some kind of like semi-pro baseball for a little bit before I went to grad school. So I changed my major. I went from a pre-med to working with my advisor, because I didn't want to lose all the medical classes because they were so important to me to understand the human body and the human mind all as one, because for everything I learned about it was separated. So coming up with this bioevolutionary psychology degree, so allowed me to take all the medical classes. It took anthropology to understand how the mind and body and people have evolved over time, then the psychology classes. So graduating from Penn State with a bioevolutionary psych degree. So, I just thought to myself, I don't want another student athlete to experience what I experienced. Was I probably experiencing depression at the time? Probably. If I would sat down with a psychologist then, probably would have been diagnosed, or anxiety, definitely like an anxiety. I hate the word disorder, but anxiety disorder. So I just thought, if I can do something to impact society and impact other student athletes, not experience and miss out on their dream, that's what I want to do. And that's what allowed me to shift my focus. So my vision was to always work with athletes. I just shifted the way I was working with them. So
I love how, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, that's good.
The thing that struck me there, and I knew a lot of your story already, obviously, but I didn't know the component of being injured as a teenager, and then how you were first enamored with the orthopedic side more or less than anything else. What I think is a cool point to make out is that not everybody that goes into medicine, whether it's physical or mental, understands that there's a connectivity.
Right.
And I think the thing that's probably helped you, and I mean, this is more of a question and a statement, but knowing how the body works, knowing when you're looking at anthropological, whatever that word is, right? The anthropology of it,
Yep.
that component, understanding how the evolution of the human body and how environmental factors come into play, and understanding physically what happens in the human body when things happen, if you get an injury or whatever, that had to help you immensely on
Absolutely.
the sports psychology side.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier about, it was a struggle, starting a private practice, and being able to, being told, with the stigma of psychology, like, hey, let me come talk to, being connected into the Pac-10, going to athletic directors and coaches I know, and hey, let me come talk to you about like this, sports psychology and performance. And it's like, no, people hear the word psychology, it's like, oh, no, I'm good. Nothing's wrong. So what I had to do was work with the stigma, and I credit my wife. She's the one we kid around. We have this table in our kitchen that we just sit around and have these deep conversations, and kind of processing like, how do I get through to this? Like, how do I break this? And okay, let's work with the stigma. So, figuring out a way to let me teach athletic directors, coaches, parents, players about the biology of psychology. So let's break down how the mind and body are connected, and then we can tie in the emotional piece, which has a direct impact on the biology of the body. And so that's what kind of really cracked the door or busted the door down for me, was figuring out a way to deliver what human performance, what sports psychology was, that it wasn't necessarily that something was wrong or something was bad. It can be very proactive. So that, being able to teach, how people have evolved, how the mind has evolved over time, and going way back to caveman times and the fight or flight response, and helping athletes, coaches, sports agents that I work with understand that, that fight or flight response, or from a primitive standpoint, our brain is viewing everything as a threat. It's just, it's the brain wants to protect us. Our brain's job is to keep us safe. So the brain is viewing that court or that swimming pool or that, pitcher's mound as a threat to that sense of self, that ego, that comfort zone, and how to work through that. And that's all that anthropological
good word. I'm glad you could say it right.
Stuff, for a lack of a better word. So taking it, that anthropology was really, critical to understand how the mind and body have evolved over time.
So you went to Penn State, you graduated, and where'd you go to med school?
So I went to Immaculata. So I didn't go to med school. I had a lot of people saying, you want to go psychology versus psychiatry. And I think that's another good thing to just talk about for a moment, the difference between practicing psychology versus psychiatry. Psychiatry is going to med school, specializing in psychiatry and the prescribing of medications for psychological disorders. For me, I had many people saying, I even had psychiatrists that I worked with when I was working and going through going through grad school at Montgomery County Emergency Service, where I was working, saying they had everything planned out for me to go to the psychiatry route. They had schools picked out and even places in Dominican Republic to go to med school. But I thought, what would I want? What would I want? So I would want somebody to sit down and talk to me. I think talking is the best medicine. And that's something that I had needed. And, if that comes, I want to come across selfish, but looking back at my experience, if somebody would have sat down and talked to me about what was going on, rather than look at the pure medical aspect, it may have made a difference. So I went the psychology route to understand people as a whole, to be able to, when I meet with people, with student athletes, professional athletes, I want to understand you as a person. I don't treat anybody as a textbook and I don't want to say digging, but going as far back as earliest childhood memories. Those experiences all kind of shape who we are today. So going the psychology route, I went to Immaculata to get my master's degree in counseling psych. again, thinking it's going to be my like terminal degree because I could get licensed at that point, and I thought, do I really want to go on and get my doctorate and do this whole dissertation thing? It's another 5 years. But again, my wife being my biggest fan and supporter, having a conversation again at the top of our steps, as I was wrapping up my master's degree, she's like, just go. We'll just go. You have nothing to lose. So went on and got my doctorate in clinical psych from Immaculata.
There's always a phone somewhere that goes
Yeah,
off, whether it's a pling or a phone or.
I thought I had it unplugged. I guess not.
So I think so what year was it when you finally got your doctorate? So I know 99 was what? That was when you.
So I graduated Penn State in 2002.
Okay.
I was taken because of my switch in my major. I had to take an extra semester to make up the credits. And then I graduated with my master's degree in 2008. So it was a 4-year. I needed 60 credits in my master's program to be able to get licensed. So I graduated in 08 from Immaculata, and then 2014 with my doctorate degree in clinical psychology.
So, and we're going to jump around here a lot. So,
yeah, no problem.
Growing up in Pottstown.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did you go to Pottstown High School?
So yeah, so I went to I went to Pottstown through 8th grade. My dad is a Pottstown grad. My mom's a Pius grad. Her whole side family. So. And
I strategically asked that question.
Okay. So I jumped ship. I abandoned. Went to Pius 9th and 10th grade, and came back. So came back to Pottstown. Graduated from Pottstown. So 11th and 12th grade.
So growing up, now you're about 8 years younger than I am. So, growing up in Pottstown back then, it was a different. I graduated in '89, so it's a little bit of a different era. What was the climate of the culture, the energy in Pottstown at the time? Because when I grew up, Pottstown was, and I'll give you a little bit. I went from Pottsgrove to Pottstown. I went through Pottsgrove until 8th grade, and then came to Pottstown, and it was like night and day between just the culture of Pottsgrove and the culture of Pottstown were two different places. Mm-hmm. One was very clique oriented, very segmented population within Pottsgrove, and Pottstown was like this all inclusive melting pot. And the unifying factor of Pottstown was that 98% of us were poor, right? There wasn't this have and have nots. There was very few haves, and almost everybody was a have not. What was it like when you went there?
Pretty much same thing. I very thankful for my experience at Pottstown, with the diversity and being around different cultures and ethnicities. I think has really helped me today. In what I do, I work with athletes of all different backgrounds, coming from, whether it's a rich family background or players who have kind of, work with a player now that grew, is now a professional basketball player, but, was in and out of shelters growing up and out of foster homes. So I think, as you said, it's kind of that melting pot of just a lot of diversity. And I appreciated my experience. I thought, I enjoyed it. I had a lot of friends, and everything was cool. And of course, being a sports guy at that time, Pottstown sports were just booming. It was coming off a state championship in basketball. Football team's good. I think Pac-10s and baseball team. We were okay. We were okay. But it was. I enjoyed Pottstown. I did.
And I think. I talk to a lot of people and from all over the country, all over the world on this podcast. And the one thing that I've noticed, and the people that have an inner drive and a passion and kind of know their strengths and where they want to go, that's great. But if you don't have the cultural awareness, like to be able to go into different places and assimilate, that's tough. And, I talk, we both have been a part of the eyeball, International Ball Players United with Howard Brown, and which is a pro combine for players that want to go play in Europe. And you have a lot of these guys that are talented basketball players that just don't have the ability to assimilate.
Right.
They don't have the ability to, there's guys, if I tell them they're going to go to Portugal to play basketball.
Mhm.
They might last a week because they've never left the block they grew up on in whatever city they lived in. And that,
Right.
you have to have, I think, on top of the passion and the understanding and the self-awareness, you have to have the ability to adapt.
Mhm.
And I think what Pottstown forces, especially white kids, to
Yeah.
figure out is
Uh-huh.
how to adapt.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of my strongest suits. And I would probably say that's probably one of yours.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a great point. My work with Reading High School, being able to go up to and work with Reading, boys basketball the last 5 years. I remember my first time walking in and working, with the team. Yeah, I was the only white individual, but for me, like I don't see color,
Right.
because
Oh,
of
yeah.
my experience. We're people, we're people, and because I wasn't nervous or afraid or scared or showed any hesitation. The boys there just we're tight, like we are boys. Every the 5 years, there's a lot of respect that goes back and forth, and I can't help but take that back to my experience at Pottstown, and just being around, getting to learn, playing on teams where there was a lot of diversity um, in
I
all
think
aspects of life.
one of the best things that ever happened to me, and this is a, directly a result of our relationship, was being able to go in and speak to the boys at Reading, the Reading boys basketball. For people that aren't from the area, Pottstown is a small urban town about 17 miles east of Reading and about 20 miles west of Philadelphia, like right in the center between Reading and Philadelphia. And Reading is a very tough city. It's got a lot of negatives attached to it, but it's got so many positives that are not really getting the attention they deserve. And one of those positives is the Reading boys basketball program.
Yeah.
And I would argue that one of the reasons why they are so fundamentally strong in both their play and their attitude and their character is a result of having someone like you come in, and Coach Rick Perez and his staff, and the way that he holds these kids accountable every single day. And these are kids that are coming from, some of them are homeless, some of them have gang members in their family or were gang members. I mean, there's such a mix of kids in there. And let's talk about what it was like. How did you get that connection with Reading basketball, and then what was it like to see? And we'll talk about the main, I don't want to say the main, but the star of Reading. We'll talk about him a little bit too. But how did you get that first connection into Reading?
Yeah, well, it started with that star. Yeah, I really applaud Reading School District and Lonnie Walker's family for they reached out. They recognized 10th grade year there was something special with this kid. Everything he said about Reading being one of the poorest cities in America. I think at one point it was the poorest city in America a few years back. That here's a young man who has an opportunity to go pro. So they want to make sure that he had everything from a physical standpoint, and they recognized the psychological aspect, the stress that he was experiencing, having a city kind of on his shoulders, being a part of the Nike EYBL, and ended up being an ESPN. Well, he finished number 14 that year in his class as far as the number 14 best player in the country coming out of high school. So I was contacted to come in and initially just work one-on-one with Lonnie, and walking into Reading again, unfazed. He and I hit it off right away. So we were doing some individual work, and anytime I work with a player, I always want to get permission to talk to the coaches, talk to as many people as possible. Again, the clinical side of me wants to truly understand the individual I'm working with to best help them. So asking to talk to Coach Perez, Lonnie's like, yeah, please, sure, go ahead, talk to the coaching staff. I remember the phone call with Coach P. I was driving in my car, and he just talking to me about Lonnie, and I'm describing what I do and going back to describing how the mind and body work together, that neuroscience of performance. He said, would you mind talking to the team once? Let's see how it goes. Absolutely. I hop at every opportunity. As soon as somebody opens the door, I'm there. So I went in, had that first initial session. I hit it off with the boys. We connected, and I've been tied in with the team ever since, for I guess going on 5 years, 5, 6 years. So that was my into Reading. It was that initial phone call that they were looking to make sure Lonnie had everything he needed.
Well, that's rare, especially in a city public school,
Yeah.
that they would go outside of the district. One of the biggest phobias of public schools is to bring in outsiders
Right.
into the inner workings of their school district. You know, I can't tell many times I've been told no by schools to come in to do leadership development or whatever because I'm not one of them. I'm not an employee. I'm not. I'm just not. I'm not part of the
Right.
process there. So for Reading to see, and number one, I mean, for people that don't know Lonnie Walker, he plays for the San Antonio Spurs. He is this year's starting to emerge as a valuable asset to that team, and it was, I think, by design that they slowly rolled him into the process.
Yep.
And I would, as much as I disagree with a lot of what Coach Popovich says, I do agree 100% with his coaching.
Mm-hmm.
You can't deny his ability to get the most out of players and do so for long periods of time.
Right.
So there's a method to his madness. And when he got drafted by the Spurs, I was very comfortable knowing his background, knowing the type of work you did with him, that's probably a really good place for him. What were your thoughts?
No, I agree. Once, of course, everybody wants to be that lottery pick, and he was projected to go lottery, and for whatever reason, I mean, draft day, it's you never know where you're going to get selected. But once he kind of fell to like 15, like I knew the Spurs were coming. I'm like, I wanted him to go, even though it's nicer to go a little higher, but the Spurs were a perfect fit. He's such a coachable kid. I should say now that he's so receptive to feedback and learning. Like, he's somebody that just wants to be the best Lonnie he can be on the court, off the court, and knowing, following NBA basketball, knowing Pop, and it was a good fit. To go into that, to learn the game of basketball, to truly learn what basketball is, the X's and O's, the intricacies, and that's what he's learned over time. He's kind of paid his dues, and the average person doesn't understand like what's going on in the background, as you mentioned, as far as player development. And the Spurs, making the playoffs 22, 23, 24 straight years, they kind of know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's in a perfect spot. And moments that he's frustrated, sure, but again, he kept that emotional control. He knew he was there to learn, and he just soaked it in. He sucked it in, and now he's starting to emerge. He's putting it all together.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning here is that you allowed me access to that team. You asked me to come in and have a talk with the boys. My wheelhouse isn't psychology. My wheelhouse is leadership and accountability and responsibility, and that's kind of where I fit in the sports world. Is after the hard work is done by somebody like you, I go in and sort of put the icing on it. But
team effort.
It was being around Lonnie and being around Wesley Butler, and who I would argue is one of the best all-around leaders I've ever been around in athletics. Wesley Butler,
Yep.
And to be around them when they won the whole state title, and the city of Reading doesn't have much to hold its hope out for, but they fell in love with that boys basketball team when they won the state title. What, 16, 17, when was it?
2017.
That was one of the coolest things ever.
Oh yeah.
And I can only imagine, I was there for 2 or 3 different segments of time, but that ride, just watching it and talking to Coach Perez and talking to you, and it's amazing the team of people that were put together to help that group of boys who literally became family with each other and loved one another. Like this was a true unbridled care for how each other were, not as just players, but as people. And I told Lonnie right before the parade, I pulled him aside. I said, don't ever lose touch in the fact that you chose to be the type of leader that you were that year. Lonnie could have scored 30 points a night.
Yeah. Yep.
Lonnie didn't choose to score 30 points a night because he knew that his team,
Mm-hmm.
was talented enough to support his own efforts.
Right.
And you would notice in time, I don't know if you saw this or not, but there were moments in the playoffs where things were getting dicey.
Mm-hmm.
And Lonnie hadn't really taken a lot of shots. He never really asserted himself as the star of that game. But then, like, he saw a moment in time, said, "This is when I have to do that." It was almost like a switch.
Yep. Yep.
That turn, and that's a special kind of player to be able to not only when it's crunch time perform,
Yeah.
but have the trust and the patience
Mm-hmm.
to allow the game to happen, allow his teammates to either have a good game or a bad game, and see where things are going, and then make adjustments off of that. That's the thing I found the most fascinating about what happened that year.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. I get that question a lot. Like, yo, you work with Lonnie Walker, how comes he only averaged, 15, 16 points a game in high school? You're right. He could have easily scored 30, 40 points a game, but leadership, he's a team player. Like, he understanding the game of basketball, they're boxing one in him, and, could he probably, took that box and one, the guy's face guard? Absolutely. But, if the defense is coming at him, he knew he was going to have somebody open under that basket, or they were going to continue to run that offense. Coach Perez, it's run it till somebody pops open, and that's what they did. And yeah, that leadership and that's something that he and I talked about, and you coming up there really contributed a lot to that team. Your talks are still talked about, up there as far as leadership, and that ability to flip the switch is something that I work with players on. It's knowing when and why. So, come crunch time, to be able to take over the game, then Lonnie's going to take over the game to make sure they get the win. But before that, he's going to play the game of basketball the way basketball is supposed to go. It wasn't that kind of street style basketball where I know I'm an ESPN top 20, 25 guy. I'm just going to take over because I know I can. It was letting Wesley Butler run the point. It was allowing Tyrone Nesby to, sit on that perimeter to hit the three, or Isaiah Cook to be down low, dish it down low, because, okay, Isaiah Cook may be like 6 foot or 6'1", but, that mentality of, I don't care if you're 6'5", I'm still going to be aggressive and go to the basket. So he knew how to coach the players on the court, and put them in the right position. And that's what I think allowed them to go on and win that state championship. And when you talked about family, one of the
I'm not going anywhere, but keep talking.
Okay. One of those like defining moments would be there you go. My wife was just going through
signature right there.
Yeah. Was they people may not know, but they didn't win the district that year. So they got knocked out. They were favored to win the district. Obviously, they got knocked out by Harrisburg. After that loss, and this is something that's talked about publicly, is the team was at odds. So, being, kind of running through the Berks County League, running through the first half of districts, and taking that loss to Harrisburg kind of rocked them mentally. And there was a little bit of, some, fighting going on, not physical fighting, but, the players were at odds and not really sure like who to, quote unquote blame. And going in after that, drawing in the clinical side, we sat down and we, as a family, we talked about what's going on. How are you feeling? What is contributing to you, being frustrated with so-and-so or with the coaches or, whatever it is. And it ended up being literally a 3-hour group therapy session, where everybody had opportunity to speak and talk and, emote. And, it was supposed to be 45 minutes to an hour, and it went 3 hours. And Coach Perez saw the value in that and just let it go. And the coaches, that's one thing I really respect about Coach Perez. He's always involved. So even though like I'm there, you're there, somebody else is there, they bring in clergy to talk to the kids, alumni talk to the kids. Coaches are always there participating. So there's the coaches talking about how they feel, and it was such a kind of defining moment for that team of being able to come back together, because they could have easily fallen apart. But I'll never forget that. That's something that always stands out to me.
I I'm so thankful that you allowed me to be part of that. So we'll transition out of the Reading boys because, it's not the defining moment for you. You've had many. Um, when you decided to open up your own practice, because I think on the entrepreneurial side,
Mhm.
there's some value to talk about that. The difficulty in, because um, there's not a lot locally, a lot of sports psychologists. It's a very unique niche, and it's one of those niches that um, you're either very good or you're a poser,
Mhm.
right?
Right,
There's
right.
not a lot of gray area between
Yeah,
success and failure.
yeah, yep, yep. And for me, the word psychology, again, processing with my best business partner, my wife, it's like, what else can we call this? So going by like neck up training. So everybody has a trainer nowadays, a skills trainer. We have strength training. They're taking care of their bodies. They have a nutritionist. So let's train from the neck up. So like defining what really helped me kind of define my practice was that neck up training, using that terminology because it kind of destigmatized a little bit. It opened the door to explain that neuroscience. So the beginnings, as I mentioned earlier, it was rough. It wasn't easy. There's a lot of rejection. Grateful, thankful that we met through the Tri-County Chamber of Commerce. As I'm trying to expand, I had some stuff going on, but I really wanted to expand and initially opening office in Collegeville and getting connected to Tri-County. They said, hey, why don't you connect with Matt Cubbler and Kyle and Jason at Max Out. And I remember that initial meeting, and once I said I did CrossFit, you got up and you wanted to throw me out. Like, it was funny. You're like, oh, CrossFit, what the heck is that? It's a bunch of BS. So,
Yeah.
you
No
guys,
funny, Pat.
giving me the platform, coming into Max Out and working with the families there and educating, your athletes and, kind of helping me get connected to Springford and, other schools to grow and expand. So, I got to give, a lot of thanks and kudos to you and the Max Out team for opening the door to me, even though I did CrossFit.
Well, I will
I
say
did the
that you
Max
did,
Out. You got me doing Max Out. I was the strongest I ever was. I'll support that. Like, I was
and
strong.
that's all I wanted to prove. That was literally, I was willing. You could have been in there selling, snake oil, and all I wanted was a chance to prove that Max Out was what it says it was going to be. So you did that, and so we were always going to be good after that. So let me ask you this: when you decided to make that your full-time job, you're going to go all in on building this neck up training with Inner Edge. By the way, his company's Inner Edge. I don't think we ever said that.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I'll put all the links and everything into the show on Facebook, and it's already on the podcast, the link to your website. So you're squared away there. But when did it shift to where it wasn't a startup anymore and it became a business that was something that you had identity with and people
Yeah.
recognized you and all that?
I guess just the work with Lonnie kind of opened the doors. People were starting to recognize a change, in his focus and pre-game mental preparation and his emotional control in the court. And being on the Nike EYBL circuit, which is the largest AAU basketball circuit, you have Adidas and Under Armour, but Nike is Nike. They're the giant. People ask questions, and Lonnie started to openly say, "Hey, I'm working with this guy Rick Neff," and then people were asking the parents, what's going on, or asking Coach Perez, and then my name kind of got thrown around and started to get my phone started to ring, got emails, text messages, and um, led me to another local star, Cam Reddish, now with the Atlanta Hawks. He's down at Westtown School, working with him, and Lewis King. He's now with the Detroit Pistons. He's from New Jersey, and so that got me connected to agents, got me connected to being able to travel around, work with some high major Division I schools, Division II, Division III schools, and so really that kind of like people noticing what was changing in Lonnie, and him moving up the ESPN rankings. And I don't, my influence is minimal. He's the one that put in all the work. It's a thing with this, neck up training and mental training. It's the same thing with physical training. So he really believed in it. So he was doing the mental reps as well as the physical reps, and it showed. And so that really helped kind of open the door to have things kind of take off. And so I kind of carved out a niche so being a baseball player, I always thought MLB was going to be my niche. But, playing basketball, I understand basketball very well. So now I've kind of carved out a niche in the basketball world, from EuroLeague to NBA to college, high school, and youth.
I think it's several things. It's a testament to having a strategic plan on what your focus was going to be, as far as understanding how the mind body works. I think if you were just a clinical psychologist who happened to be a fan of sports,
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to work with athletes, I don't think that person would have the same amount of success as you have had, because of your understanding of the human body, understanding of the physiological components, understanding the biological things that happen inside of your body when stress happens.
Right.
Those things, I think, have helped you immensely, on top of the fact that you had a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You had a strategic plan on what you wanted to do in the business.
Yeah. I mean, initially I kind of advertised as clinical and sports, thinking I still got to have income.
Right.
So I was already kind of established in the clinical world, but then eventually, again, talk to my wife. Let's lop off that clinical and just go sports, and let's roll with it. Let's see what happens. That, and being able to build rapport, with is something I really pride myself on. And just there's difference between your traditional therapist or clinical psychologist, or stepping into my office. It's, as you see now, it's pullovers, it's sweatpants, it's shorts, it's sneakers. I'm not sitting around in a shirt and tie in my private practice office during the day. Being in more of the Tower Health, I have to dress up. But for me, it's a relaxed atmosphere. Like, I want to I'm just another guy that kind of has some information and may be able to help you. I don't pretend to be some world-renowned, mightier than thou person. And so being able to sit back, relax, my office is all sports decorated, build that rapport really helps, athletes, parents feel a lot more comfortable, that I'm not, because I always ask, one of my first questions is always, what was the first thought or image you had in your mind when you knew you were coming here? And it's always, they're describing Sigmund Freud.
Right.
That old, sitting with the pipe and couch. I have a couch in my office, but that's that look, that shirt and tie, and knowing the game too. Knowing the X's and O's and the different offenses and defenses, and the struggles that the players go through with teammates, with coaches, with the pressures they face, trying to get to college and then to go pro. So being relatable that way. I've got a lot of feedback from professional teams, college teams that I work with, that they brought in that traditional psychologist, and here he or she comes dressed in that suit, that tie, dress shoes, and can't quite relate, doesn't understand the game. So the players check out mentally. It's like, oh my God. He's just kind of talking psychological theory. So being able to take psychology, neurology, biology related to shooting a free throw as the crowd's roaring, what's going on in the mind and the body, how's it reacting, and how to control that. I think is kind of ended up along the way being able to adjust and be very growth mindset to change my business plan and allow me to kind of get established in the field.
And I go back to, because only reason I can say this, because as a cop, people have a vision of who I am, right? People think that I'm this militant, hard ass, by the book, goody two shoes, do-gooder. And the reality is I grew up in a single parent home on welfare, and I sold drugs in high school. I was the opposite of everything anybody would think I am. And I think part of why I was able to connect with the boys at Reading was because my story was very similar to one they're going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
Where you go once you graduate high school determines on your outlook and your abilities and where you believe you should be. And it's not necessarily a byproduct of where you were. But the one thing that is a byproduct of that is when you're trying to assimilate into an environment that you may not naturally look like you fit into. Mm-hmm. Having that ability to do that by commonality, through shared commonality, is the thing I will go back and I'll tell it when anybody ever comes to me and asks me for who to recommend for sports psychology or anything like that. I always recommend you because I know your background. I know your ability you can have a conversation with an upper middle class white girl who's a swimmer, or you can have a conversation with a kid who's been in 10 different foster homes and was homeless and lives in an inner city. And I think that ability to assimilate, without a doubt, based on where you grew up and how you grew up, mm-hmm. and where you went to school growing up, has immensely helped you become successful in your professional life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree, and I appreciate that compliment. Yeah, between that growing up in Pottstown, and one thing I did in my getting my doctorate degree, so get my master's, working with kids. In the beginning I was bad. I was terrible. I remember specifically some parents and kids just looked at me like, "What the heck is this guy talking about?" So I knew I needed more supervision when it came to working with kids. So I made it, doing my pre-doctoral internship at Belmont down in Philadelphia. And again, knowing my vision, where I eventually wanted to go, knowing I'm going to need that experience with diversity and also with kids, spending a lot of time getting a lot of great supervision on how to effectively communicate. And when it comes to expressing, performance or psychology, not using all the big terms. So, being a Pottstonian, my experience there, and then knowing what I wanted to do and knowing that I couldn't be, cocky or arrogant, just think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to have a doctorate degree, I'm going to know everything. Using the resources I had and taking advantage of them to kind of help me become the best version of me, and that's still ongoing. I never rest. I always want to get better.
That's very admirable, and I think one of the greatest qualities about you is that you're never just simply okay with being where you're at. Mm-hmm. And there's a hunger, and I think that hunger is seen by other kids when you talk about having a hunger and having a want and playing for one another and all that. Like, they got to be able to see that in your life too.
Right. Yeah, that's
why kids aren't dumb.
No, they're not. They're not. There's been times kids try to, they'll call me out. Like if I'm something's not right, like if I'm just being blah, they'll call me out, and I appreciate that. Every team I work with, I want them to do that. I say I don't pretend to be perfect or know everything. I'm a human being. I got stressors in my life. Just because I have these psychology degree, I'm not my own therapist. That's just, it's life reality. Everything's not sunshine and rainbows. They going back to the why. I just think it's important for everybody that I work with, whether it's individual or team-wise, to know my why, because I'm just not some guy who is a brainiac that got some degree that's looking to make a lot of money by being eventually being a psychologist. I'm here to help you because I missed out on something. I missed out on something that I maybe could have had. There's no guarantees, but because I didn't have the resources then, because of the stigma, I don't want to see that happen to the next person. So sharing that story of my why and what I went through, kind of makes me, I'm just another person. I'm just another human being that's a part of this family or this team that we're going to help each other become better. That's kind of my rapport. That's how I start every relationship off is going through that why.
I think that's an awesome, life teaches us lessons. Yeah. Whether we want to have that lesson or not, it's going to teach it to us. I've gone through, the month of December was literally, I was in a funk, and I've never asked for help. Like, it's just not how I'm wired. I have this burning desire to solve every problem that comes my way, even if they are in me. So I probably could have gotten this figured out a lot earlier if I would have just talked to somebody, but I took the whole month to figure out that I was simply, I was beating myself up for things that I didn't really have any control over, but I felt as if they were my responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that the value of having somebody to bounce that shit off of is important. And whether it's a clinical psychologist or a buddy who just happens to understand you,
Mm-hmm.
and that's important.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You know, it's that understanding of you. It's that, and you know, it's that understanding of that person, and you know, that rapport, that relationship. You know, nothing's going to work. Nothing I do is going to work unless I have a trust, a rapport, an understanding of who I'm working with, and they have an understanding of me. You know, where I break some of the traditional rules of, I guess maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but this is just who I am. You know, it's, you know, of as far as like disclosure, you know, sharing my story. I'm not perfect. I got stressors, these things that go on. You know, with the athletes I work with, you know, they text message me. There's communication outside of the traditional. You know, I can only talk to you during that hour that we have scheduled. No, you know, life is life. Things happen. If you need to text, here's my number. You know, might not be able to get back to you right in the moment, but contact me. I don't want people to feel like they're hanging, because again, that's not what I would want. So, you know, some of those traditional rules can get broken. You know, I guess keep that quiet. No,
And no one will hear it. Don't worry.
But yeah, coming back to the point that, you know, that understanding of, we don't need to have a clinical psychology degree all the time to truly help somebody, to sit down and be an active listener. I think our society misses that a lot, is sit down and listen to what's going on. We're so quick to want to impulsively, you know, come back with a response or fix it or recommend something, because emotions for people are scary. We don't know what to do with emotion. But sometimes somebody just needs to, like you said, just bounce something off of somebody. You know, have that third party that, again, I truly believe they need to truly understand you to be effective. But I think, you know, that's important to have to grow. You know, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't get a degree specifically in sports psychology. I went the clinical psychology route to have an understanding of people. Again, it's not that I don't. People aren't textbooks, so you know, certain things that I pull from sports psych. You know, most of my sports psych stuff I've kind of studied on my own. I didn't take any formal sports psychology classes. It's just being able to parallel neurology, biology with psychology, and make it all kind of click and flow together.
And I think the ability to understand human behavior and understanding and picking up on cues. You know, my background's in human behavior and body language, so I spend that's why I do video interviews, so that I can read your body language, and I can sense when something's clicking with you, and whether or not you're being holding back or being completely open. Like that's why I do these types of shows. But for me, I think the key to when I mentor kids, when you're dealing with your student athletes, the sooner that they know that you hear them
Mm-hmm.
and that you trust them,
right,
they reciprocate. It's almost instantaneous. It's like a switch. You just sort of see it happen if you're paying attention.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. You know, that switch happens. You know, one thing like kind of outside of the sports psychology, well, I guess it's still kind of like performance psychology. We're talking about like building trust. One of my biggest challenges was a few years ago, coming into Franklin Elementary School at Pottstown. The principal, Kevin Downs, had reached out to me. The PSSA scores weren't the best. So working with their fourth graders to have me come in, let me take, you know, performance psychology, kind of, you know, put it on a fourth grade level, you know, relate to the kids. Don't come in and, you know, give this assembly and tell them what they have to do and need to do. It was building that rapport. So during a whole year's worth of assemblies of training, you know, I guess training, their PSSA scores had the highest jump in the state from the previous year.
Wow.
And again, it's the students that did it. I was just there offering the information, being an active listener, having like roundtable discussions with the teachers, the principal, with the students. What are your biggest fears? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about all these things, giving them some strategies on how to manage anxiety when it comes to test taking, some test taking strategies, and just being another guy that's coming in to talk to them. It was like a friendship. We developed a friendship. It was that, mentoring. And so that was, that's something that always stands out. And with the student athletes I work with, getting emails or phone calls from teachers saying, hey, so-and-so's grades are going up. I asked them what changed, and they said, well, they're learning about their emotions. They're learning test-taking strategies through the sports psychology stuff. So I always parallel what I do with teams, because sports at some point is going to come to an end, and then real life kicks in. So being able to manage, take what we're doing, and parallel it with life and with school.
I think it's awesome. And, what would be the one thing that you would tell a parent or a student athlete who is considering seeking out a sports psychologist that is struggling on whatever level with performance in their particular sport? What would be the thing that you would tell them that would be the thing that forces them or causes them to make that call?
Yeah. First thing that pops in my mind is confidentiality. I think there's a misunderstanding of coming in and meeting with me. So that, the players I talked about, the teams, they all give me permission to talk about them. So I think there's this fear with parents of, oh my gosh, I see something's wrong. Everything's checking out from a physical standpoint. Is it psychological? It can't be psychological. But if I go and make an appointment with, Rick, everybody's going to know. And that's not the truth. Unless they're giving me permission by law, there's nothing. I cannot say a word. So I think, they're protected. They're protected from a confidential standpoint. And, if you just look at your son or daughter as a person, pure performance, whether it's on the court, off the court, starts in the brain. So the healthier that the mind is emotionally, the better off they're going to be all around as a person. And sometimes I get, are you just trying to help my son or daughter go pro or land a Division I scholarship? If that's what they want, sure. But in reality, no. I just want them to have a true, full understanding of themselves. Understand that emotions are real. Emotions drive us. Not to ignore them. Not to suck it up and get over it. So that being protected from a confidential standpoint. And that's, one reason I never connected to a professional team is I don't want to be put in that position to be forced to have a team paying my paycheck, teams paying the player's paycheck, and be forced to try to disclose something.
Right.
And I think that's allowed me to create a positive reputation in the professional world, because players coming to me, they know that it's going to remain confidential. I've had magazines, Sports Illustrated, Bleacher Report. Somehow they may have caught wind that I was working with somebody contact me, but I can't even respond to that. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but you're protected. Confidentiality. Nobody has to know but you. And I fully honor and respect that.
And I vouch for the fact that he does. And then one other point I want to point out is that in today's society where, the millennial mentality, right? Everybody's getting a trophy or whatever, this image of that, right? So then there's the opposite side of that where everybody's saying, toughen the hell up,
right?
Show some grit, some resiliency, but there's never that middle, which is really where it all lives.
Yep.
Right. So where I try to, when I work with kids and I can tell that they're in crisis on some level, there are moments in time where grit and resiliency need to be enacted because it's not really crisis they're in. But when a kid's having an issue, whether it's performance in sports or test taking or emotional well-being, you have to deal with the emotional state first,
right,
before you can ask for grit and resiliency.
Right.
I think that when we're talking about student athletes, when we're talking about kids that are under a lot of pressure, we're in an age now where tests and performance are literally everything.
Yep.
The school funding is coming from,
Yep.
The standardized testing and all that stuff. So schools are under the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Coaches are under the gun to keep their jobs, to have kids that are performing at a high level in the sports.
Right.
And ultimately, it's the kid that's paying the emotional toll in that, because they got to perform in that school, in the classroom environment, and then they got to perform in sports. So no one's really addressing the emotional state of the student athlete. So if I were to give advice to a parent, it would be that acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
the environment we're putting our kids in.
Mm-hmm.
Be aware of, it's neither right or wrong. It's reality. There's a lot of two-parent working households. There's not always a lot of conversation happening. There's not always a lot of identification of changes in behavior.
Right.
What I always tell parents is be more cognizant of the day-to-day with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
See the changes. And if you see a change staying in a negative change for more than a couple days, then you got to sort of start looking at why. And I think that would be the ultimate reason why someone should come to talk to Rick Neff, is because not everybody's equipped to fix that, to help navigate through that problem.
Right. And that's a great point. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that the world's coming to an end. And I think, that's unfortunately that stigma of, I got to go sit and talk to somebody. Not everybody's a sociopathic killer. And I can say that for, I did my dissertation, I have a very strong interest in forensic psych, but that's just the image that society portrays. So, yeah, I mean, kids really aren't, if you look at it from a developmental psychology standpoint, kids aren't fully aware of their emotion or what to do with it, or why am I feeling this way? So then they're trying to figure it out. In today's day and age with social media and YouTube, they're getting misinformation, and it's better to sit down with somebody, face to face, and talk it out, be proactive, as you said.
And I'll say one last final thing before we close out the show. I don't give out, I don't vouch for a lot of people. I just don't. You've got to reach a certain status in my life to where I believe you're the best option for whatever it is, whether you're my handyman or my mechanic. I don't vouch for a lot of people, because I don't want anyone to ever come back to me and say, well, that person didn't do for me what you said they were going to do. Mm-hmm. So I'm very specific on who I vouch. And I have, without a doubt, without hesitation, vouched for you and what you do. You are the best that I've ever met at what you do. I've seen the body of work. I've met some of the people you've worked with. And I know the type of person that you are. So if anybody out there is in a position where you need for yourself or your kid to have some professional help to help work through some things, I highly recommend Rick Neff and InnerEdge for that solution.
Thanks. I really appreciate that, Matt. I know that it means a lot. You're a very well respected, man in the area and society, and same thing for you. When it comes to like working out, and it's go, because same way. Like, I don't want, as you said, you said it perfectly. I don't like the word perfect, but perfect. I want to make sure that I'm creating a network where I'm sending people that I know they're going to be taken care of. And so, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, hang tight. We're going to talk after the show.
All right.
I'm going to close out the show. Thank you very much to my guest tonight, Dr. Rick Neff from InnerEdge Sports Psychology. He is literally the man with a plan to fix your performance issues. If you have a student athlete who is just having some struggles, got the yips like he did when he was a sophomore in college, I highly recommend you go see Rick Neff. Inner-edge.com is the website. I'll put all that in the links in the show notes and all the social media posts. I'll put all his contact information. If you haven't had a chance to watch Lonnie Walker play for the San Antonio Spurs, please do. Cam Reddish, who was a star at Duke last year, is now playing for the Atlanta Hawks. What's King's first name? Lewis King, who's playing for the Detroit Pistons. He played at the University of Oregon.
Yep.
All talented, really super great kids who are doing amazing things with their lives. And a lot of it has to do with many people in their lives, but one of those people is Dr. Rick Neff. So thank you very much for watching this episode and listening to this episode of the Two Dates in a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. If anybody wants to find out more about me, they can go to my website, mattcubbler.com, MattCubbler.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Thank you, everybody. God bless. Take care and be kind to one another.